Greetings, guitar fanatics. This video is going to be about soloing, specifically why some guitarists are out there working hard on their playing, but they're still finding it very hard to learn how to solo or improvise. I wanted to make this video because of a comment I got from a student recently. He said, I'm practicing my scales and arpeggios, but when I go to play over a backing track or I'm playing with some friends, I just freeze. The chords go zooming by and I just sit there with my guitar thinking, now what? Well, this is actually super common, and if it's happening to you, well, you're in luck today. Over the last several decades, I've noticed 3 big reasons why students struggle to learn how to solo. And today, I'm going to show you the same fixes that I showed them. We're going to learn better ways to practice and not how to just train our fingers, which honestly might be part of the problem, but how to train our ears and how to retrain our mind. I know this is going to help your playing, so let's get after it and play some guitar. So let's get right into the number 1 reason that guitarists struggle to solo. And really, the only way I know how to say it is, you don't really know what you think you know. And I could take that one step further. Sometimes we might learn a concept pretty well, but we don't concentrate or focus on what it is about that concept that would allow us to play good solos. In a nutshell, guitarists spend a lot of time learning patterns, but not enough time exploring what they can do with the notes of those patterns to play something really cool. More on that in a minute. But here's an analogy to illustrate my point. It's sort of a cliche that someone that's relatively new to a martial art would get the bad end of a street fight because while they're trying to remember the different things that they've been taught in class, their opponent has already punched them in the face 20 times. And I see something similar with guitar students all the time. When I take on a new student, I always spend some time with them and I ask them questions about what they know, what kind of scales, etc. And they'll say, oh, I know the pentatonic scale. So I said, well, show me. And they invariably play pattern number 1 of A minor. It's always A minor. And I'll say, well, that's great. And this has happened many, many times. But do you know the other 4 patterns? And I usually get this blank look coming back at me and they say, oh, there's more patterns? Or they might know all the patterns, but I'll say something like, well, can you play that in D flat or E flat? And I get that same deer in the headlights look. So being able to play one pattern of one scale in one area of the fretboard, that does not mean you know a scale. I can take that one step further and say that just memorizing a finger pattern, that doesn't mean that you know how all those notes in the scale relate to one another, and it certainly doesn't help you relate those notes to the chords that you're playing over. Granted, we got to start somewhere, and scales are great for developing your timing, your synchronization, getting your fingers moving. But to be able to really use a scale well, we have to know enough about the makeup of that scale and how the notes of that scale relate to different chords to be able to choose the best notes to make up our licks and phrases. Let me give you some practical examples to practice and study. Number 1, when we're learning a scale, take the time to study the formula for that scale. For instance, let's take A minor pentatonic. Why not, right? That scale has the formula, the root, minor third, 4th, 5th, and flat 7. Those notes would be A, C, D, E, and G. So what's important about that? Well, let's say we're going to try soloing over a blues. And if we just take the typical 1 chord of a blues, which would be A7, in the key of A, that chord has the notes A, C sharp, E, and G. And we can see there's a mismatch between the scale, which has a minor third or a C note, and the chord, which has the major third or the C sharp. Now, experienced blues players will bend that minor third up towards the major third. That's kind of a hallmark of good blues playing. And I would argue that understanding the relationship between the notes of the scale and the notes of a chord that you're playing over, and being able to find those notes within the scale patterns all over the neck, well, that constitutes knowing a scale far more than being able to mindlessly run through a pattern. If you can easily find the notes of a chord within the patterns you know on the neck, well, then making up licks, that becomes easy. Let me make up a couple licks here using almost exclusively the root, the minor third bent up toward the major third, the 5th, and the 7th. Which are the 4 notes of an A7 arpeggio. I do sneak the 4th or the D note in here and there, But we can make up licks like this pretty easily. Here's 2 at the 5th fret. Here's 1 at the 10th fret. Here's 1 at the 12th fret. Here's 1 at the 15th fret. And here's 1 at the 17th fret. So that's an example with pentatonic scales in the blues. How about practicing the major scale in a way that really promotes knowing the major scale? Now, getting into all the things about the major scale I think you should know is beyond the scope of this video. But let's go over a few things. You need to know that there are 7 notes in the key of G. We'd have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and we're back to our octave or G. And off of each one of those notes, we can build a triad and a 7th chord. And we could spend our time sort of mindlessly memorizing, say, a 2-octave G major scale pattern. Or we could really gain some practical knowledge by learning how to play, for instance, the triads of the G major scale, both horizontally up and down the neck and vertically across the neck, like this. Seeing someone play through the triads of a scale in both ways like that really shows me that they've got a deeper understanding of what that scale is all about. Another soloing concept I think it's critical to get your mind around is the difference between chord tones and non-chord tones. Now, a chord tone is simply one of the notes that makes up a chord. Like with a major 7 chord, we have the notes the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the major 7. For G major 7, that would be the notes G, B, D, and F sharp. And if we play those notes over a major 7 chord, it sounds nice. But if that's all we play over that major 7 chord, it's going to sound boring really quickly. And we can introduce some tension into the sound by playing some notes from the scale that aren't in the chord, like the 2nd, the 4th, or the 6th. And then we move back to a chord tone from one of those notes, and we get a sweet sounding resolution from that tension. And that's what makes licks and solos sound really good. Here's an amazing drill you can practice, and I got this from the great fusion guitarist Alan Hines, who plays some of the sweetest sounding licks and phrases that you'll ever hear. The idea of this drill is to make up a combination of intervals. So we're going to be using numbers here, and we're going to move through each note of the scale and play that sequence over it. So in the key of G, let's start with the root, the 3rd, the 7th, the octave, the 6th, and the 5th. So here it is over G. We'd have G, B, F sharp, the octave, E, and D. And this is trickier than you might think at first, because as we move and we make each note of the scale the root note, the intervals and the fingerings are going to be different. So each time we start on a different note, something's going to change. So here again for G, we had the root, major 3rd, the major 7th, octave 6th and 5th. But starting on A, we're going to get a root, the minor 3rd, the minor 7th, the octave, the 6th, and the 5th. Let's take it all the way through the scale. Let's try one more. This is going to be a little longer sequence. We're going to play the root, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th, the 9th, and then we're going to play the octave, 9th, and 10th. So that little sequence over G would sound like this. And again, be careful as you move through the different root notes because the fingerings, the intervals are going to be different. It's going to trip you up, but it's fun and it's great practice. Check this out. So this exercise kind of drives home the point that I've been making. Rather than just wiggling our fingers around and moving them mindlessly through a shape, we're having to adjust the fingerings as we move from note to note and either think hard about it or use our ears or both to play the correct notes, and we're adapting on the fly. And isn't this much more what improvising and soloing is all about? So I just spent a lot of time on problem number 1, but it is a big one and I think it's so important that we discuss it. Now let's move on to the next thing that I see holding students back from being able to solo well, and that is trying to do too much too soon. I'm a big fan of the saying, you got to crawl before you walk, and you got to walk before you run. I see a lot of players out there struggling with things like the modes of the major scale before they're really fluent with the pentatonic scales. Or for that matter, trying to play all sorts of flashy licks with a pentatonic scale before they really know how to take 2 or 3 really choice notes and make them sound good in a given situation. Let's go back to our blues example. A typical 1-4-5 blues in the key of A, we would have the chords A7, D7, and E7. So let's take our root of the A, which is our A. We're going to take the minor third bent up towards the major third, which is C sharp, no, C bent to C sharp, and then E. So up in the 12th position, we've got A at the 14th fret of the G string, C at the 13th fret. Remember, we're bending that up a little bit. Then we've got E at the 12th fret. And we could make a little lick up like this. And since we have to hang on a couple of these chords a little longer, we could also throw in the 6, which is F sharp, and we learn how to make a statement like this. And we can take that, move it through the rest of the chords in the progression, D7, E7. So we move it through the entire progression and we can see just how much mileage we can get out of a little motif like that. So check this out over a 12-bar blues backing track. So with an example like that, instead of worrying about scale patterns, we're just taking a few notes. We're working on our timing. We're working on our phrasing. We're working on our ability to say something meaningful with only a couple of notes. So how about a chord progression out of the major scale? We're going to play over a little heavier track here. It's got the chords E minor, C, G, and A minor. And let's pick 3 intervals to play over each chord. How about the 5th, the root, and then we're going to play the 9th and bend it up to the 3rd. Now we've got 2 minor chords and they're going to have a minor third, so we're only going to need to bend that 9th up a half step. On the 2 major chords, we're going to have to play the major third, so we'll have to bend the 9th up a whole step. So over E minor, we're going to have the notes B, E, and then we're going to bend F sharp to G. C, we're going to have G, C, and we're going to bend the D note up to E. Over G, we're going to have D, G, and we're going to bend A up to B. And then over A minor, we're going to have E, A, and then we're going to bend the B note up to C. I'm gonna give this a go over the backing track, really concentrating on phrasing and timing. Let's have a listen. So I'll make the point again, playing little melodic statements like that that fit perfectly over each chord, well, it shows me a player understands a scale and the notes of that scale and how they intertwine with the chord progression far more than someone that just runs through some scale patterns without stopping and highlighting the juiciest notes of the chord. Now, there's any number of exercises you could do to practice this type of concept. You could play through a chord progression and just target one note, like the third or the seventh. You could target two notes that have a resolution from non-chord tone to chord tone, like the second to the third or the seventh to the root. It really helps to train your ear hearing those different intervals and how they work together. And it really trains your brain and how to think about the fretboard musically rather than mechanically. So let's move on to our last big soloing roadblock. And that's not having really listened to and absorbed enough guitar-related music and guitar solos in particular. I know that long before I could play the kind of solos I wanted to, I could sing them. And to this day, if I'm out with some guitar playing buddies of mine, we're having a drink, we're having dinner, and a cool song or solo comes on in the background, we instantly start singing or humming it and playing air guitar. People like to say that music is a language. If you think about how you learned your primary language, it was by listening and copying when you were a little baby. Now, when we go to learn a second language, it's usually in an academic setting and we're studying vocabulary and we've got some sort of a teacher telling us different rules. But we're never going to get really fluent with that language unless we hear people that can speak it really well, having conversations, and we try to participate in those conversations. Well, isn't learning to solo just like that? I mean, even if you have a tab in front of you, you're never going to sound like the original artist unless you've listened to them, you've studied their articulations, their inflections, their phrasing, their timing, just like authentically speaking a language. Think of it this way. How can you get the music out of your head and through your fingers if there's no music in your head? Now, a huge part of developing your ear is just by trying to play melodies that you hear. It could be a nursery rhyme. It could be the theme song to your favorite news program or television show that you like. From there, you might graduate to trying to copy singers and all the little inflections they put in their vocal lines. Just last week, I was working with some students trying to get them to play the vocal melody to the Allman Brothers song, Midnight Rider. Then start listening to solos by your favorite players. Listen to them enough that you can start to follow along and sing parts. And if you're not a very good singer, at least listen to them enough where you can start to hear the notes vividly in your head and you can sort of follow along as the notes go by on the recording. And once you can hear those things in your head, well, then working with something like tabs, it's going to be far more productive. Your ears will start to lead your fingers around to some extent because you know what it's supposed to sound like, and you're playing, it's going to sound better and better because now you've got a model to emulate, just like learning a language. And here's a really important tip. More than trying to learn entire solos in the beginning, I think it's really important to isolate certain licks and phrases. Learn a bunch of licks by your favorite players, but then the real progress is going to come when you start to take that lick, change it around, use it in different situations, embellish it, and make it your own. I was listening to one of my favorite young blues rock guitarists recently, and I heard him play something like this little lick with thirds at the 13th and 15th frets over a slow blues in D. The whole lick goes like this. And I thought, well, that's cool. So I learned it, and then I kept messing around with it, and I started thinking, okay, what else can I do here? So I added in another third at the 10th fret. Okay, that's cool. And so after that, I started to explore the notes on the high E string, and I came up with this. And I noticed that when I slid into that final note there, well, there's a D minor triad at the frets 19, 18, and 17. So let's throw that in there too, along with a couple other choice notes on the high E. And then we're going to finish it off with a little double stop bend on the high E and B. Here's the whole lick. So what started off as a short lick by a player that I really admire turned into a longer lick that now I can call my own. You know, what we end up with, what we call our style, is really a mishmash of all the things we've ever heard and internalized. If we listen to enough music, really absorb it, and practice trying to get it out of our heads and out into our fingers, it's going to come out in random ways that we can call our sound. But it starts with listening to a lot of music, a lot of guitar players, just devouring the sounds that you really love and that you want to emulate, and one day you're going to be able to call it your own. You do this stuff we talked about in this video, and I promise you, you're not only going to start developing your chops, you're going to develop your brain, you're going to develop your ears. Your solos are going to start to sound more melodic, polished, and awesome. Here's another video that's going to teach you some great soloing strategies. They're simple, they sound fantastic, and you'll be able to apply them in no time. Enjoy the video, and I'll see you soon.